In the 5th year of our marriage, Michael Mitchell's mistress, the canary he kept outside, was pregnant. I had the bodyguard take her to a private hospital. Just before she was about to enter the operating room, Michael arrived in a hurry and shielded the canary behind him. Turning around, he slapped me hard and said, "Amelia Wilson, who gave you the nerve to harm my child?" 01. He hit me so hard that I staggered a few steps, with half of my face numb and aching. But his eyes held no hint of remorse towards me, just pure, unrelenting anger. The corridor of the private hospital was eerily empty. Ella hid behind Michael, trembling and crying, saying, "Michael, she's a lunatic. She actually tried to harm our child. You must put her in a mental institution." Michael glared at me with icy coldness. "Amelia, I've promised you that the position of Mrs. Mitchell will always be yours. I will have this child raised by you. From now on, he will only call you Mom. What are you still dissatisfied with? Are you so cruel that you can't even spare a child?" Upon hearing that Michael wanted me to raise the child, Ella's face turned ashen. And as I looked at the man I had loved for 10 years, I felt a deep chill inside. He's humiliating me by asking me to raise his child with his mistress. I was trembling all over, slapped Michael back, my voice choked with tears. "Michael, are you saying I can't have a child if you want one? You want me to raise the child of your mistress? Who exactly is being heartless here?" But after saying those words, I realized I was asking the wrong question. Michael despised me. He wouldn't even touch me, so how could I possibly bear a child? A wave of despair overwhelmed me, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I leaned weakly against the wall, tears streaming uncontrollably. Through my sobs, I accused, "Michael, just because I love you, do you think you can treat me so recklessly?" Michael's reddened face finally showed a crack, his gaze softening with a hint of pity. However, he didn't immediately come to comfort me. Instead, he had his assistant take Ella away and instructed him to ensure the safety of the baby. Once Ella was taken care of, Michael's attention turned back to me. He wiped away the tears from the corner of my eyes and gently stroked my swollen cheek. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I shouldn't have acted out of anger and hit you. Stop crying. If you really can't accept the child after he's born, let Ella raise him herself. I'll make sure she and the child stay far away from you so they don't disturb you." He really knows how to stab me right in the heart. It felt like my heart was pierced, the pain so intense I could barely breathe. Crying, I kicked him, pounded him with my fists, and shouted hoarsely, "Michael, you make me sick. Why are you treating me like this? Why?" Facing my relentless anger, his patience finally wore thin. His face darkened as he restrained my legs and wrists and said coldly, "Amelia, stop losing your mind. I told you before we got married that I no longer loved you. The path you chose is yours alone. You have no right to make a scene with me, understand?" Yes, he no longer loved me. I knew that all too well. 02. I met Michael when I was 7. That year my parents divorced. Neither wanted to take care of me, so they left me at a playground. If Michael, who was 9 at the time, hadn't brought me back to the Mitchell family, I'd probably have been trafficked long ago. We grew up together, from childhood friends to lovers. Everything was incredibly smooth. I once thought we would live a plain and happy life together. But when I turned 20, the Mitchell family business ran into trouble and was on the brink of bankruptcy. Michael's father suddenly died of a heart attack, and his mother fell gravely ill from grief. Michael was burdened with enormous debt. The creditors tied him to the rooftop of the 37th floor and threatened to throw him off if he didn't repay the money. I wanted to save him, but it was $1 billion debt. Where would I get that kind of money? I had no choice but to turn to Michael's rival, Thomas Carter, the second son of the Carter family. If I agreed to stay with Thomas for a month, he would cover the $1 billion debt for the Mitchell family. I didn't want to, but I was truly desperate. I couldn't bear to watch Michael die. I wanted him to live. Yet, when I saw Michael a month later, he looked at me with red eyes and said, "Amelia, I'd rather die than let you save me." His face was filled with pain, his voice full of sorrow and despair. "Amelia, I'm a man. To have you sacrifice your purity to save me, how could I face you?" He cried bitterly, and I reached out to hug him. But as soon as I moved closer, Michael recoiled and said, "Don't touch me." I stood there, stunned, unable to believe what was happening. He closed his eyes in pain and said tremulously, "Sorry, Amelia, let's break up. I can't continue to love you." From that moment on, our relationship was beyond repair. The only consolation was that Michael was resilient and managed to revive the Mitchell family within 3 years. That same year, Michael's mother fell gravely ill. She had always been fond of me and feared that if she were to pass away, I would have no one to rely on. So she asked Michael to marry me and made him promise to protect me for the rest of his life, or she wouldn't rest in peace. Michael agreed. But on our wedding night, he refused to share the bed with me. He said, "Amelia, you gave me your first time and sacrificed so much for the Mitchell family. I owe you, so I must take responsibility. But I'm sorry, I no longer love you, and I can't be intimate with you anymore. However, I promise that you will be the only woman in my life. I won't cheat or do anything to hurt you." For the past 5 years, I kept telling myself it was okay, that even if he didn't love me, it was enough to see him every day. It would be fine to live out our lives as respectful strangers. But he lied to me. 03. 2 months ago, when I discovered Ella's existence, she had already been with Michael for nearly a year, and was even pregnant. That day, I was kneeling at Michael's mother's tombstone, crying uncontrollably. "Mom, Michael is lying to me, he's lying to me." If Michael's mother were still alive, she would never allow Michael to treat me this way. But she was gone, and no one was there to protect me anymore. I cried until I collapsed in the cemetery, and when I woke up, Michael had brought me back home. He looked exhausted, his voice low. "I'm sorry about Ella, but I really like her. She's so innocent and sweet, and I feel at ease with her. But don't worry. Since I promised Mom to protect you for life, I won't go back on my word. I'll keep Ella outside. She will never threaten your position as Mrs. Mitchell. As for the child, I don't want him to be a bastard. The Mitchell family needs a legitimate heir. So when he's born, I'll let you raise him. All the Mitchell family's wealth will belong to you and the child." I could hardly believe my ears. How could he say something so cruel? Why did he think I would accept a man who had betrayed me? Why did he think I would be willing to be the mother to Ella's child? The pain was overwhelming, my tears nearly soaking the pillow, and I choked out, "Michael, you know very well that what I care about is never the position of Mrs. Mitchell, and certainly not the Mitchell family's fortune." He replied hoarsely, "Sorry, this is all I can offer you." I could accept that he no longer loved me, but I couldn't accept that he gave his love to someone else. And I certainly couldn't accept him having a child with someone else. So that's how today's hospital fiasco came about. The decision to leave had likely been made on that day. 04. Michael and I started a Cold War. Ella was settled in a villa in the western suburbs. That night, I received a message and pictures from an unknown number. Michael said he won't let me and the child be separated. "Miss Wilson, don't even think about trying to steal my child." Last night, my leg cramped and Michael was so thoughtful, he gave me a calf massage. The dinner Michael made for me was delicious. I'm sending you a picture. It's a shame you didn't get to taste it. Michael said that when our son is born, we'll have a daughter next. Haha, aren't you envious? Even if you're Mrs. Mitchell, so what? Michael doesn't love you. He only loves me. I knew it was Ella and immediately blocked her. But those messages and photos felt like poisoned arrows, once again piercing my heart, causing it to ache unbearably. I could no longer sleep. I took a cab to a nearby bar, hoping to drink away my troubles. And that's where I ran into Thomas again. I had drunk quite a bit and was almost taken advantage of. Thomas didn't touch the person. He just put his arm around my shoulders and led me aside, then had his bodyguards break the other person's fingers off my waist. Hearing the person's pained screams, I suddenly sobered up, the effects of the alcohol fading quickly. I quickly moved away from Thomas, stepping aside. Thomas raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Afraid of me?" He laughed self-deprecatingly and shook his head. "Amelia, you really know how to hurt someone's feelings." Even though Michael insisted on repaying the $1 billion he owed me after his success, I never intended to get it back when I gave you the money. $1 billion and you just shed a few tears. I couldn't bring myself to touch you. What are you afraid of? Yes. During that month, nothing happened between Thomas and me. On the first day when he pinned me down and kissed me, I cried. He got up, frustrated, lit a cigarette, and after a while he clicked his tongue and said, Amelia Jia, are you blind? Can't you see I'm more handsome than that little brat Michael? Why are you so upset? I wrapped myself in a blanket, crying uncontrollably. I'm sorry, I only like Michael. Thomas was furious. He's a worthless piece of trash relying on you to save him. What's there to like about him? I sobbed and argued back. Michael isn't worthless. It's my choice, not his fault. Thomas laughed in anger, gritting his teeth. I really don't believe I can't move this wall. Amelia, in a month, I'll make you beg me for you. He wanted me to judong. So, during that month we went in and out together, but he never touched me. However, even though nothing happened between Thomas and me, to outsiders it looked like we were involved. He was notorious for his numerous flings, and no one believed he would lie in bed with a woman and just talk. Michael didn't believe it either. I told him Thomas and I were completely innocent, but Michael thought I was lying. He believed I was fabricating the story to salvage our relationship. I had no way to defend myself. 05. As I recalled the past, my headache started again. I grabbed my handbag and left the bar. Perhaps worried about me getting into more trouble, Thomas followed me closely. When crossing the street, I didn't notice the traffic lights. If Thomas hadn't timely wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me to the curb, I might have ended up in the hospital. Miss, do you want to scare me to death? Thomas exclaimed. I was belatedly frightened, my palms sweating coldly. At the same time, a voice filled with anger came from behind. Amelia! I turned to see Michael's dark, icy expression. He strode over, yanked Thomas's arm away, grabbed my wrist and pulled me to his side, his voice cold as he scolded me. Publicly tussling with another man. Have you forgotten your identity as Mrs. Mitchell? Thomas suddenly sneered. Michael, you've already had a bastard. What right do you have to criticize Amelia? Michael's eyes shifted slightly, but he coldly retorted. No matter how I act outside, it doesn't change the fact that Amelia is my wife. Thomas, you have no right to interfere in my affairs with my wife. At least you're the president of the Chin family. Do you want to be the third man? Thomas raised an eyebrow, laughing indifferently. I'd be happy to be the third man for love. Do you have a problem with that? Michael's gaze toward Thomas was full of hostility. He scoffed coldly. Your willingness means nothing. I advise you to give up quickly. Amelia has only ever loved me. See, he knew I loved him unconditionally. Yet he still cruelly hurt me. Even though he no longer loved me, he still had a strong possessiveness and used my love for him as a weapon against Thomas. I suddenly felt like crying but also found it amusing, so I laughed through my tears. I laughed loudly, my tears flowing more fiercely, looking like I had gone mad. The two men in front of me changed their expressions but dared not stop me. After a while, I finally stopped laughing, staring desperately at Michael with red-rimmed eyes. He also looked down at me, his jet-black eyes reflecting my pale face. My voice trembled uncontrollably. Michael, I'm 28 this year. From the time I started dating you at 18 until today, it's been a full decade. I spent 10 whole years realizing that those promises of growing old together and everlasting love were all lies. As if realizing what I was about to say next, Michael's eyes showed panic, and the fingers gripping my wrist tightened abruptly. I took a deep breath, trying to control the pain inside, and said slowly but resolutely, Michael, I don't want you anymore. Let's get a divorce. As soon as the words left my mouth, Michael's whole body shook, and he looked at me in disbelief, asking dazedly, What did you say? 06. I knew he heard me clearly, so I didn't repeat it or look at his bewildered expression again. I just withdrew my wrist from his grip, turned and walked to the curb to hail a cab. Thomas, who had been silent, followed me. Amelia, it's getting late, and you've been drinking. For your safety, let me drive you home. Before I could refuse, Michael, recovering from his shock, stepped forward and punched Thomas. Are you trying to seduce my wife in front of me? Do you think I'm dead? Thomas retaliated with a punch of his own, disdainfully sneering. You're about to be my ex-husband, aren't you? Michael's face darkened ominously. Do you want to die? After a few exchanges of blows, they started fighting. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I didn't care about them anymore. I hailed a cab and left. Once home, I immediately started packing. Just as I filled one suitcase, Michael came back. He had several abrasions on his right cheek, likely from the fight with Thomas. I didn't know what had caused his sudden outburst. All I heard was his stern voice. "Where are you going with your suitcase?" "To find Thomas." Though Thomas and I hadn't had any contact in recent years, I wasn't planning to explain to Michael. After all, we were about to divorce. Where I went was none of his business. So I said, "I'll go wherever I want. You have no right to control me." This statement seemed to touch a nerve. He angrily pressed me against the wall, his face almost twisted with fury as he interrogated me. "You want to divorce me because of Thomas, right? Because he said he still loves you, so you're moved? Or have you already been secretly involved with him? How long have you been together? Do you miss the month you spent with Thomas 8 years ago? Amelia, you say you love me, but you're sneaking around with an old lover. Are you so desperate, so unable to endure loneliness?" He audaciously reversed the blame, putting the reasons for the divorce on me, using repulsive language to humiliate me. I trembled with anger, kicking him with all my strength, but Michael didn't move despite the pain. "Thomas was right. You've committed adultery and had a bastard. What right do you have to criticize me?" The mention of Thomas seemed to be Michael's Achilles heel. His eyes burned with fierce anger, as if he wanted to incinerate me, and he sneered. "Do you just listen to Thomas? Are you falling for him? Planning to divorce me and marry him? Amelia, you were the one who stubbornly insisted on marrying me. In this lifetime, you're a member of the Mitchell family, alive or dead. Want to betray me and live happily with Thomas? Don't even dream of it. I won't let you have it your way." I felt like he might be losing his mind. Even though he no longer loved me, his ridiculous and obsessive possessiveness wouldn't let me go. I had already wasted 10 years with him. Was I to spend the rest of my life trapped in this prison? Unable to endure any longer, I pushed him away. "Michael, are you insane? We'll divorce tomorrow, and you can marry Ella the day after. Your son won't have to be a bastard. Isn't that a happy ending for everyone?" But he wouldn't listen to me, stubbornly keeping the focus on Thomas. "Are you so eager to be with Thomas?" 07. He was just being unreasonable. I suddenly felt extremely tired and didn't want to say another word to him. Silently turning away, I resumed packing clothes from the wardrobe. But this silent response in Michael's eyes seemed like acceptance. He grabbed my shoulders, turning me back around, his eyes locked on me with a trace of manic obsession. His voice was chillingly cold. "Amelia, you'd better come to terms with this. I will never let you be with Thomas. I won't give you a second chance to betray me. You can only love me in this lifetime, understand?" I didn't understand. I truly didn't understand how he could be so shameless. He didn't love me but demanded that I love him forever. He wanted me to love him but never allowed me to be close to him. He could sleep with other women and have children but required my loyalty. Why? Feelings of anger, frustration, and sorrow surged from my heart, and I broke free from his hold, with a determined attitude said, "Michael, you have no right to demand that I love you. Don't think that by saying a few harsh words, I'll let you control me. I am alone and have nothing left to lose. What can you use to threaten me into staying? You don't even have leverage to blackmail me. Do you think I'm afraid of you? I'm definitely getting a divorce. No matter whether I marry Thomas or any other man in the future, you have no right to interfere. Do you hear me?" Seeing my determination, a trace of panic and helplessness actually appeared in Michael's eyes, as if he was truly afraid of losing me. It was so absurd and laughable. A man who had despised me for 8 years and kept a mistress for a year was afraid of losing me? But no matter what he thought, it no longer concerned me. I was too tired and didn't want to entangle myself with him any further. 08. The driver took me to the apartment on Tongan Road. It was a property that Michael's mother had given me while she was still alive. That night I didn't sleep well, plagued by dreams. I dreamed of being 7 years old, afraid of the dark. Michael had bought a small nightlight for me and sang lullabies to help me sleep. I was scared of thunder. Every time I heard it, I would shiver and hide under the table or in the wardrobe. Michael was always the first to find me. He would hold me and with his clear, youthful voice tell me, "Amelia, don't be afraid. I'm here to protect you." I dreamed of being 14 with a poor appetite for a time. Michael patiently fed me spoonful by spoonful. It was also that year that I nearly fell victim to a predatory piano teacher. When Michael found out, he went crazy, beating the hell out of that bastard. The man had 2 ribs and a leg broken and lay in the hospital for a full half-month before recovering. I dreamed of being 18 on the day after the college entrance exams. Michael confessed to me with a bouquet of bright roses. He was so nervous, stumbling over his words. "Amelia, I really like you. Can I be your boyfriend?" I laughed and said, "You don't have the chance to be my boyfriend, but you can be my husband." He smiled, his eyes crinkling, and embraced me. His embrace was truly warm. The last scene was from 7 years ago when Michael was working day and night to revive the Mitchell family business, almost living at the office. On winter solstice, I made his favorite 3-flavor shrimp dumplings and sent them to the company with the driver. Knowing he was busy, I didn't dare disturb him and just wanted to watch him from a hidden spot. To my surprise, I saw him staring at the box of dumplings for a long time before tossing it directly into the trash. The assistant, puzzled, said, "Mr. G, Miss Wilson specially made these for you. It's such a waste to throw them away." Michael wiped his fingers with a tissue, not even lifting his eyelids, his voice indifferent. "Dirty things should be thrown away. There's nothing to regret." At that moment, my heart felt like it was being torn apart. I knew clearly that he wasn't rejecting the dumplings. He was rejecting me. He didn't believe that Thomas and I were innocent. If I had been smart and decisive enough, I should have left him back then. It was my own foolishness and stubbornness that led me to be swayed by youthful affection and waste 7 years on him. Only today do I regret not having acted sooner. 09. I slept for a full 3 days before finally waking up completely. My mind was consumed with nothing but thoughts of divorce. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Michael. "Please have the lawyer draft the divorce agreement as soon as possible. I don't want to delay this any longer." I had foolishly trapped myself in this relationship for so long. It was time to truly move on. After a brief cleanup, I went to my favorite private restaurant. The owner greeted me with a smile. "Amelia, you haven't been here in a long time." Recently, I had been so worried about Ella that I hadn't had the mood to enjoy any food. The owner was familiar with me and knew what I usually ordered without me saying a word. To my surprise, not long after the dishes were served, Thomas appeared in the restaurant. I was a bit taken aback, but he remained calm, sat down opposite me, looked at the dishes on the table, and smiled lightly. "Have you been eating these dishes for 5 years and not gotten bored?" I was even more surprised. "How do you know?" He raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. I didn't press further. Noticing the bruises on his lips, I apologetically said, "I'm sorry that you got beaten by Michael because of me." Thomas retorted, "Michael's injuries are much worse than mine. If anything, he should be saying that I beat him up." As expected of a sworn enemy, even in this matter he wanted to come out on top. Thinking about how he helped me in the bar a few days ago, I felt it necessary to show my gratitude and asked, "Do you want to have lunch together? I'll treat you." He gave a slight smile. "Sure." Sitting at the same table with him after 8 years felt almost surreal. He was still as humorous and witty as ever. But during that 1 month 8 years ago, I was so troubled that no matter how he tried to amuse me, I couldn't smile. I vaguely remember on the last day, he sat on the carpet looking defeated and said, "I don't understand. What does Michael have that I don't? Why do you look down on me so much?" I replied dejectedly, "You're great, but you're not Michael." He smiled bitterly. "Even though I don't think much of Michael, I have to admit I envy him. He must have accumulated a lot of good karma over several lifetimes to meet someone like you, who loves him selflessly without expecting anything in return." Looking back now, I also think I was truly foolish. I foolishly gave everything for Michael, only to end up betrayed. Thinking about this, I suddenly felt I deserved better and considered asking for more property and stocks in the divorce. Those things were rightfully mine. If I didn't fight for them, wouldn't Ella get a big advantage? Lost in thought, I noticed there were several more peeled shrimp on my plate. Thomas reminded me, "Amelia, stop spacing out at the table and eat more. You're so thin that I'm afraid a gust of wind might break you." His tone made me laugh. "It's not as exaggerated as you say." He put a piece of braised pork on my plate. "It's good to see you smile. You look pretty when you smile. Don't keep frowning all the time." It seemed that since I turned 20, I had rarely smiled. Fortunately, Thomas was particularly good at cheering people up. By the end of the meal, I had smiled more than I had the entire month combined. During the meal, I went to the restroom. As soon as I finished washing my hands, the owner secretly pulled me into a private room. I asked in confusion, "Miss Taylor, what's going on?" She smiled and said, "Actually, I'm not the owner anymore. 3 years ago, the restaurant was on the verge of closing due to serious losses. It was only because Thomas invested that it managed to stay afloat. So now he's the owner, and I'm just an employee." I was astonished. Why would a real estate tycoon be interested in the restaurant business? She said, "He's not interested in the restaurant business. He invested in my place purely because you love to eat here. Miss Taylor, don't tease me. He has so many girlfriends. How could he still think of me?" Miss Taylor replied, "I don't know about his relationships with other women, but I can confirm that he's genuinely sincere about you. To be honest, this place is a niche market, and even now it loses 7 figures annually. But because you like it and come here almost every week, Thomas has kept the place open even though it's losing money. He asked me to keep it a secret these past years, so I never told you. But I heard recently that Michael has an illegitimate child outside. Why are you still holding on to him? Amelia, listen to me. Instead of wasting your life on a scumbag, you'd be better off focusing on someone who treats you well." 10. I didn't verify the restaurant story with Thomas. Even though Harper Taylor said that Thomas bought the restaurant for me, I couldn't quite believe it. Though I hadn't had contact with him in years, I occasionally heard news about him. His entourages of beautiful women were always changing, never seeming to end. I didn't think I was special enough for him to remember me so obsessively. Even 8 years ago, when he tried to win me over, I didn't believe it was because he loved me. I knew I didn't have that kind of charm to make him willingly offer $1 billion. He probably just wanted to take me from Michael, given that they had always been rivals competing over everything. After finishing the meal and leaving the restaurant, Thomas suddenly asked me to wait. I watched in confusion as he walked into a 24-hour convenience store on the corner. 3 minutes later, he handed me a strawberry-flavored lollipop. I smiled and took it. "Thank you. When I was young, my parents didn't like me, but my grandmother was very kind. Whenever I was unhappy, she would magically pull out a strawberry lollipop to cheer me up. When I was 6, my grandmother passed away, and no one bought me lollipops for an entire year after that." Thomas reminisced. "When you were 7, Michael lured you home with a strawberry lollipop at the amusement park." I looked up in surprise. "You remember?" His smile was a bit bitter. "Of course. After all, I was the one who approached you first that day, but you ended up holding Michael's hand. I've wondered many times over the years, if I had given you a strawberry lollipop instead of ice cream, would you have chosen me?" I thought for a moment and replied honestly, "I don't know." He looked at me with intense eyes. "Amelia, so this time will you choose me?" I was momentarily taken aback. "What?" His deep eyes held both hope and anxiety. "You're about to get a divorce, aren't you? This time, could you hold my hand? In the future, whatever you want, whatever I have, I can give it to you." The sudden confession caught me off guard, and I asked in a daze, "Huh? You can't really love me, can you?" He was stunned for several seconds before forcing a self-deprecating smile. "I don't love you. Do you think I'm burning money just for fun? If I didn't love you, would I care about your tears and not even dare to touch you? If I didn't love you, would I go to such lengths to make you smile just to see you happy? Amelia Jia, don't tell me you've never believed in my feelings for you." I fell silent. After a while, I awkwardly said, "You have so many girlfriends. Today it's an actress, tomorrow it's a model. It's hard for anyone to believe you're sincere about anyone." He immediately defended himself. "That's not true, those are rumors. Sometimes at social events, those small celebrities drink with me to use my identity as a shield, avoiding many hidden rules. I'm too lazy to deal with them and don't have the energy to clarify each one. If I knew you'd take me seriously, I'd have Thomas's pure written on my forehead." I was still skeptical. He anxiously continued to prove himself. "Amelia, you have to believe me. I haven't touched any of those women. If I'm lying, I'll go bald by next year." His desperate attempts at self-defense made me laugh. I didn't actually doubt him. Otherwise, he could have done whatever he wanted to me 8 years ago, and there would have been no need to give me a choice. But I still didn't respond to his confession. After all, my marriage with Michael was not yet dissolved, and I didn't want to lose my moral standards like Michael. Thomas said, I didn't expect you to accept me immediately. I just wanted to tell you how I feel. The future is still long. I've waited for you for 10 years. A few more years won't matter. My heart skipped a beat. It was hard to imagine that someone had been silently waiting for me while I loved Michael for 10 years. 11. We walked along the side of the road chatting. I was wearing high heels that didn't fit well, and I accidentally twisted my ankle on a stone. Thomas helped me sit on a bench and seeing that my ankle was a bit red, frowned. Stay here. I'll go buy a bottle of spray for bruises and strains. With that, he hurried off. About 15 minutes later, he returned not only with the spray but also with a pair of light brown ballet flats. He had good taste. The shoes were quite pretty and matched the color scheme of my dress perfectly. He knelt in front of me, wanting to apply the medicine. I pulled back a bit. It's okay. I can do it myself. His fingers paused before he said, All right, just make sure to gently rub it after spraying. Okay, thanks. It's just a small favor. Don't be so polite. But you'd better not wear such high heels often in the future. Oh, you don't understand the struggles of short people. You're 1.60 meters tall. That's not short, is it? I complained while rubbing my ankle. When I first met you as a child, you were even shorter than me. Now I only reach your shoulder. He couldn't help but laugh. Fortunately, I've grown in height and appearance. Otherwise, I'd really be embarrassed to pursue you. Especially since you're so beautiful. He was too modest. With his looks and charm, he would stand out even in the entire entertainment industry. We sat side by side on the bench, chatting for a long time, discussing everything from funny incidents during school to his parents pressuring him to go on blind dates. Before we knew it, it was evening. His gaze fell on my ankle. Does it still hurt? I stood up and walked around a few times. It's fine now. He smiled. That's good. He glanced at his watch and asked, Are you hungry? What do you want for dinner? Steak. Whatever you want, I'm fine with it. Then steak it is. I'm craving meat today. The steak at the restaurant was excellent, and I ate to my heart's content. But I didn't expect to run into Michael in the parking lot. 12. As soon as Michael saw me with Thomas, he started going crazy again. He stepped forward and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away. I struggled fiercely. Michael, are you out of your mind? Let go of me. He sneered. Let go of you so you can continue flirting with Thomas? Amelia, we're not even divorced yet. Are you so impatient to be with him? Didn't you hear her asking you to let go? Thomas's voice carried a cold edge. Michael shot a disdainful glance at him and mocked. What right do you have to tell me to let go? Are you addicted to being the third wheel? Thomas didn't mind the sarcasm. He simply said in a deep voice, You hurt Amelia. Let go. Seeing that Michael had no intention of letting go, Thomas threw a punch. Michael was caught off guard and stumbled back a couple of steps, reluctantly releasing me. Reacting quickly, he tried to retaliate, but I stepped in front of Thomas in time. Michael's fist stopped midair as he stared at me in disbelief. You are protecting him? You're actually protecting him. His voice trembled slightly as if he felt wronged. Amelia, how can you protect him? What right did he have to feel wronged? I laughed bitterly. Didn't you protect Ella in the hospital? You even slapped me for her. Michael's face turned pale and he stammered. I was just desperate at that moment. I didn't mean to hit you. Behind me, Thomas's eyes suddenly turned fierce. His voice was low but chilling. You hit her. He stepped forward and kicked Michael to the ground. Michael, have you no shame? He kicked Michael several times in a frenzy. Amelia almost gave her life for you, and you still hurt her? You have her already. Why don't you cherish her? Michael coughed heavily from the kicks and pushed himself up, grabbing Thomas by the collar and angrily saying, The reason Amelia and I are in this situation is all your fault. If you hadn't taken advantage of the situation and had Amelia stay with you for a month, how would we have ended up like this? Thomas angrily shook off Michael's hands. Now I finally understand what it means to gain advantage and still act aggrieved. I didn't even touch Amelia and sent her back to you. You got both the person and the money, and now you have the face to complain here. Michael didn't believe it. You stayed with her for a month and nothing happened? Thomas, do you believe that yourself? Thomas coldly glared at him. I did wish to have Amelia, but I wanted her to willingly be with me. If she had shown even a little liking for me 8 years ago, if I had really touched her, I would never have sent her back to you. But she said she only loved you, and during that month she didn't even smile at me once. Michael, Amelia gave her whole heart to you. How can you bear to hurt her like this? You're even worse than a beast and unworthy of being my rival. Even as Thomas berated him, Michael didn't refute, only staring at me blankly. Clearly, he believed Thomas's words. His eyes started to redden as he said in a daze, Amelia, so you weren't lying to me. I smiled bitterly. It doesn't matter anymore, Michael. I don't need you to believe me. Now I just want a divorce. I didn't even want to look at him again. Turning away, I walked to Thomas's car, opened the passenger door and got in. The car drove past 2 streets. Thomas held the steering wheel with his left hand and handed me a tissue with his right hand. Don't cry. He's not worth your tears. I sniffed and shook my head. I'm not crying for him. I'm crying because I'm stupid. Isn't it funny? Until today, Michael never believed that you and I were innocent. For years, to maintain Michael's reputation, I pretended to be a loving couple with him in public, so everyone thought we were very happy. But the truth is, as soon as we got home, he started giving me the cold shoulder. Because he thought I was dirty, he said he couldn't love me anymore, even throwing away the dumplings I made for him. The problems between us had already become irreparable even before Ella appeared. I really regret not leaving him sooner and foolishly staying with him for 8 years. Thomas listened to me in silence, then suddenly turned the steering wheel left and drove back. His face was unprecedentedly dark, his jaw tightly clenched, and his back teeth almost grinding together. The fingers gripping the steering wheel were strained, the veins bulging on the back of his hand. I guessed he intended to go back and confront Michael to vent his anger for me. But his emotions were clearly unstable now, and if he acted on them, it might end up in a hospital. I hurriedly stopped him. Forget it, Thomas. I don't want to see Michael right now. Don't go back. He looked at me, his brown eyes filled with both anger and concern for me. All right, I'll do as you say. He parked the car by the roadside, pulled out a cigarette pack and asked in a hoarse voice, I want to smoke. Do you mind? It's fine. Go ahead. He took out a cigarette and put it in his mouth but struggled to light it several times. Finally, frustrated, he threw the cigarette into the car's ashtray, rested his forehead on his hand for a long while, and finally managed to calm his anger. His voice was rough. I'm sorry, Amelia. At the time I was too selfish and wanted you so much that I made a deal with you for $1 billion. Actually, I never planned to let you go back. Even if you didn't love me, I was ready to keep you by my side forever. But when you cried, I was at a loss. Seeing you in tears hurt me more than a knife wound. So I changed my strategy, trying to make you like me in a month, but I still lost. I was really reluctant to send you back to Mitchell's home. But I think as long as you can be happy, even if I can only silently watch you from afar for the rest of my life, I'll accept it. His voice faltered and he clenched his fists, slamming the steering wheel. If I had known Michael was such a jerk, even if you hated me for a lifetime, I would never have sent you back to him. The silly girl I wanted to cherish and protect, how could she be bullied by him? I was clear about my feelings. Thomas had no reason to apologize. If he hadn't helped me back then, the Mitchell family would have long been ruined, and I might have already been thrown off a high building by those creditors. What right did I have to blame him? Thomas, don't apologize to me. I can't bear it. After all, from beginning to end, I've been the one causing you trouble. The reason Michael and I ended up like this is because he didn't trust me, and I loved him wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. He looked at me deeply. I never felt that you were a trouble to me. Whatever I did for you, it was willingly. Willingly. My heart stirred and I smiled faintly. Thomas, you're a good person. I've always known that. Seeing a smile on my face, his mood finally improved and he even joked, Are you giving me a good person card again? No, I'm genuinely praising you. All right, then you can consider praising me a bit more. I love to hear it. You're praised everywhere you go. Haven't you had enough? Those people can't compare to you. Even if they praised me 1,000 times, it wouldn't be as good as your one praise. All right then. I'll write an 800-word essay to praise you properly. He raised an eyebrow. I'm serious now. Don't trick me. I smiled. I won't trick you. As we chatted, the car soon reached the outside of the community. Before getting out, he reminded me, rest well when you get back. Call me anytime if you need anything. I'm available 24/7. I nodded. All right. Thank you so much today. 14. In the early morning, just as I was about to rest, someone started banging on my door. It was Michael's drunken voice. Amelia, can we talk? Please. I hadn't planned to open the door, but his persistent knocking made it impossible for me to rest. Reluctantly, I opened the door and said impatiently, You'd better be here to talk about the divorce. He, intoxicated and out of control, directly embraced me. Amelia, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you all these years. It's my fault. Please don't be with Thomas. Seeing you close to him is driving me crazy. Stop tormenting me, okay? Who's really tormenting whom here? Isn't he just a thief calling out, Stop thief? I pushed him away forcefully and mocked. Now you don't think I'm dirty and want to ask for my forgiveness, huh? He suddenly stiffened, his dark eyes filled with deep guilt. After a moment of struggle, he hesitantly started explaining. I didn't think you were dirty. I've always been disgusted with myself. When I took you back to the Mitchells, I promised to protect you forever. But I didn't fulfill that promise. I hate my own incompetence, having to rely on you to save me by selling yourself. Amelia, it's not that I don't love you anymore. It's just, I'm afraid to love you. I'm even ashamed to face you. Every time I get close to you, I'm reminded of that helpless and worthless self. After listening to his words in silence, I had a rough understanding of his thoughts. The Mitchells were considered a prestigious family, and he had always been surrounded by glory since birth. With his outstanding appearance and abilities, he had always been a standout among his peers. Everyone, whether friends, family, or mentors, spoke highly of him. He was used to being on top and being admired and adored. Falling into the mud, however, and having to rely on me to beg his enemies for help was a gap he couldn't accept. Even if he later regained his high status, my existence constantly reminded him of that humiliating past. So he couldn't face me. I looked at him with scorn and said, What's the point of you explaining this now? He desperately grabbed my hand, eyes reddened. It's meaningful. Of course it is. Didn't you think I didn't love you? Now I'm telling you, you've always been the one I love. We can start over. I had to remind him. Michael, have you forgotten about Ella? He flustered and defended himself. I never loved her. I just felt, she resembled you, the you from when you were 18. I felt speechless. Don't insult me like that. I'm not like Ella. I wouldn't interfere in someone else's marriage, and I wouldn't show off in front of the original partner. He was momentarily speechless at my ridicule, and after a while he said with difficulty, The first time I saw Ella was at the auction. 15. I heard a story about redemption. A year ago, Michael, the powerful CEO of the Mitchells, met a young girl at an auction who, to save her father from uremia, had to sell her body. When he saw her, it was as if he was seeing me from back then. The difference was that this time he could easily save Ella. He bought her, taking care of her not out of love, but more like trying to make up for his past inadequacies. He wanted to regain his self-respect, which he had once been trampled into the mud. I just found it laughable. I treated him well, but he treated me coldly and then gave all the good he should have given me to a substitute. It made my years of perseverance seem like a joke. At this moment, I confirmed that I no longer loved him. Seeing him made me feel nothing but disgust. I looked at him with disdain and mocked. Michael, since your self-esteem is so important, you shouldn't have accepted that billion in the first place. You should have let those debt collectors kill you. But you enjoyed the benefits and still mistreated me. You want everything and yet act so greedy, it truly disgusts me. His eyes suddenly showed pain and he said almost pleadingly, Amelia, please don't look at me like that. I can't bear it. It makes me sad. I sneered. Did you ever think about how I spent those 8 years being coldly treated by you? He trembled as he apologized. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I was wrong. I was too selfish, only thinking about myself and not considering your feelings. I can change, Amelia. I can treat you well like I did when we were younger. Don't be with Thomas. Let's reconcile, okay? At this point, he actually still had the nerve to talk about reconciliation. I couldn't help but retort. Are you asking me to go back to the Mitchells and become a stepmother to your child? He eagerly pledged. I'll make Ella have an abortion and send her away, never to disturb us again. Amelia will have our own baby in the future. And I'll give you everything I have. I suddenly felt Ella was quite pitiful. It was a shame she was so devoted to Michael. But to Michael, she and her child were just disposable trash. Of course, to me now, Michael was no different from trash. Want me to have his child? Dream on. I rejected him mercilessly. Michael, I won't reconcile with you because I find you disgusting. I emphasized the last 4 words, saying them very slowly. Michael's face turned ashen instantly, and his eyes reddened terribly, making me feel he was about to cry any moment. But I felt no sympathy at all. I told him, you brought this on yourself, and closed the door. 16. To my surprise, when I woke up and went out the next day, he was still sitting on the floor outside my door. Having not slept all night, he looked a bit haggard and said, Amelia, are you going to the studio? Can I give you a ride? I gave him a disdainful look. You haven't slept all night and you want to drive? I value my life. If you want to die, don't drag me into it. With that, I didn't look at him again and drove to my pottery studio. He seemed like an unshakable presence, standing outside like a doorman. Annoyed, I asked my staff to throw water at him. Xiaozheng looked a bit scared. Sister Amelia, he's the CEO of the Mitchells. How can I throw water at him? I had to take matters into my own hands. I poured a basin of mud water over Michael's head, making him look extremely disheveled. But he showed no sign of dissatisfaction and said, as long as you can forgive me, even if you pour mud on me every day, I won't blink an eye. As if a few basins of mud water could erase the past, how is that possible? I looked at him scornfully and said, you're dreaming. There's no such thing in this world. To cut through the nonsense, I had to give him a warning. Michael, if you keep pestering me, I'll expose evidence of your affair with Ella to the media. You wouldn't want the company's stock price to drop and fall into another crisis, would you? Upon hearing this, his expression instantly darkened, and he looked at me with sorrow. Amelia, do you really have to be so heartless? I smiled. Yes, I even regret not leaving you sooner. He was devastated but ultimately had to compromise. The company was the result of his parents' hard work over many years. He couldn't ignore that. 17. After Michael and I had just received our divorce certificate, Ella eagerly sent me several messages. Miss Wilson, I really pity you. You loved Michael for so many years, only to be thrown out in the end. From now on, everything Michael and the Mitchells have will be mine and my baby's. Don't think about it anymore. Oh, she doesn't know that I took half of Michael's fortune, and am still dreaming of marrying into the Mitchells. However, the next day Michael sent her for an abortion. I heard she caused quite a scene in the operating room, and was eventually strapped to the operating table with ropes. After the baby was gone, she was melancholic and cried all day. Yet Michael didn't even glance at her, only sending a large sum of money through his assistant. About a month later, Ella stabbed Michael in the Mitchells' underground parking lot, shouting that she wanted to avenge the baby. The stab was quite deep, and Michael spent a full month in the hospital before he could get out of bed. Ella was arrested and would likely be sentenced to about a year in prison. Thomas told me all this at the dinner table. I was stunned, shocked. Thomas poured me a cup of tea. Drink some tea to calm down. I shook my head. No, I just find the dog-eat-dog drama quite shocking. Thomas chuckled. Both of them deserved it, every one of them. I agreed. After dinner, Thomas and I went to see a movie. It was a sweet and refreshing romance film. But Thomas seemed to be watching me instead of the screen, as every time I turned my head, I found him gazing at me with a smile in his eyes. At first, I thought there was something on my face, but after checking my cheek, it was clean. Curious, I asked, Thomas, why do you keep staring at me? Without thinking, he said, because you're beautiful. I was speechless. So you're not here to watch the movie but to watch me? He was honest. Yes. His affection was so straightforward that I felt a bit shy. Seeing me blush, he couldn't help but laugh. Amelia, you look even cuter when you're blushing. In his eyes, everything I did was cute. Even when I was being a bit of a brat. I couldn't control the smile on my lips. 18. The more time I spent with Thomas, the more comfortable I felt. He really understood me well. He knew every detail about my favorite foods, colors, jewelry, clothing brands, and so on. Sometimes with just a glance he could tell what I was thinking. A casual comment from me, which I sometimes even forgot, he remembered clearly. Whatever I had my eye on, no matter how rare or difficult to obtain, he would go to great lengths to find it and give it to me. One day, Thomas came to my pottery studio. While his assistant was on the phone with him, he quietly told me, "Miss Wilson, Mr. Carter has collected over 100 of your pottery works." I was astonished. The assistant continued, "7 years ago, when you first opened your shop, business was slow. Mr. Carter was worried it would dampen your enthusiasm, so he wanted to help you privately. He was afraid you'd find out, so he always had me disguise myself to make the purchases. If you don't believe me, you can visit Mr. Carter's home when you have the chance. He set up a room and custom-made a transparent glass cabinet specifically to store your works. Miss Wilson, Mr. Carter is truly devoted to you. I've been with him for 10 years and I know better than anyone. And someone of his status and wealth, who is so devoted and loves you like this, is rare to find. Don't miss out." Later, when I visited Thomas's home and saw the neatly preserved pottery, I suddenly felt a lump in my throat. What must his feelings have been like during those 10 years of silent love? Was he very sad? He must have been. When I asked him, he smiled softly. "Amelia, don't feel sorry for me. I've told you, everything I do is voluntary." I looked up at him and his loving eyes were full of me, as if I were his whole world. I sniffed, holding back tears. "Thomas, are you silly? If I never get divorced, will you wait for me forever?" "Forever isn't that long, is it? I can wait." He said it so casually, as if a lifetime was just a fleeting moment. But a year has 365 days. A day has 24 hours, and every hour has 60 minutes. I've waited for others before. I know every minute and second can be tormenting. Slowly, I reached out my hand and held his. The moment my hand touched his, it trembled slightly, and his expression changed from confusion to surprise in 3 seconds. He carefully grasped my hand back and tentatively asked, "Amelia, if I'm not mistaken, does this mean we're together?" I leaned on his shoulder and softly said, "Thomas, I'm sorry for making you wait so long." He gently embraced me, his voice tender. "It's okay. All my waiting has been worth it, hasn't it?" 19. When we had been dating for a month, it happened to be the Chishi festival. Thomas's bouquet was unique. Others had roses. He had 999 strawberry-flavored lollipops. Well, the packaging was quite pretty. The candy was delicious, just a bit heavy. I took a photo of the lollipop bouquet and posted it on my social media. Soon I received a flood of likes. Thomas unwrapped a lollipop and put it in my mouth. I smiled. "It's so sweet." His eyes darkened. "Let me taste it." Just as I was about to unwrap the candy for him, he took the lollipop from my mouth and kissed me directly. The kiss lasted a long time. When it ended, I was panting and lying in his arms. He smirked. It's indeed quite sweet." After a pause, he cheekily added, "I didn't get enough, I want to taste more." If he continued, my mouth would swell up. I tried to escape but didn't manage to. Pinned down on his lap, I was kissed until I almost lost consciousness. Only when he laid me down on the bed and undressed me completely did my senses begin to clear up a bit. His fingertips, coated with a thin layer of calluses, sent shivers wherever they touched. We embraced, kissed, and entwined. Outside the window, the moonlight fell. Inside, it was a scene of romance. End of the text.